Right, so how to cheer everybody up just before Christmas when so much of the news is so dark, doom-laden and depressing? Well, have no fear, because it's anything but a Merry Christmas or a Happy Hanukkah for Benjamin Netanyahu, as matters are going spectacularly wrong for him all over the place. So given that this will be my final video before Christmas, I thought rubbing in just how awful things are going for him right now would make a very suitable video. And how dire the situation is for Israel on all manner of fronts, from Yemen to Gaza to Syria to Iraq and Iran. The festive period is shaping up to be a really awful one for Israeli interests, and I'm all here for it, so I hope you are too. So let's crack on. Right, so it's amazed me, having been collating stories as I do each day, how little in the way of how badly things have been going for Benjamin Netanyahu of late that the mainstream media are choosing to cover. Netanyahu is detested by so many people worldwide, you'd think they'd realise these are the stories, certainly to my mind, that I think people want to hear, want to know about, that he's getting short shrift over, and his warring and his aggression that he's directly involved in, or by extension, those he has supported are getting it right now. And there's multiple different stories on different fronts featuring different nations, all in the Middle East, who are giving Netanyahu a splitter of a headache right now. As much as we will be thinking over this festive period of the people suffering still, the innocent civilians caught up in the middle, from the medics still trying to save lives in places like the Camel Adwan hospital in northern Gaza, when the IDF seems so intent on taking their lives. These are the people I will certainly be thinking of this festive season myself, who I'll be saying a prayer for certainly. But let's begin in Gaza first though, a place that Netanyahu thought he'd beaten, that he'd blasted back to the Stone Age in his determination for total victory over Hamas. Well, his total victory is looking more and more like a total failure, because for as many Hamas operatives as he has eliminated, the leaderships he has assassinated, it had seemingly only deepened their resolve, and having recruited another 4,000 operatives in recent months, people determined to fight for their lives and not just sit there waiting for Israel to end them, a significant retaliation has been seen in recent weeks, but is coming in the wake of enormous daily costs still. In the last 24 hours in northern Gaza, the Camel Adwan hospital, as I mentioned a moment ago, has had its intensive care unit fired upon by Merkava tanks and snipers, as has the hospital's nursery department. I'll say again, Israel are targeting a hospital nursery with tanks and snipers. Bulldozing operations are being carried out at the now rendered useless Indonesian hospital, and the IDF continue to blow up more housing. They are levelling northern Gaza. In Jabalia, a drone has bombed streets, a bombing of a gathering of citizens there killed 5, including 4 children, and an airstrike on the Musa bin Nazir school has killed 8. Further atrocities have been committed in central and southern Gaza, including artillery shelling and more deaths and more housing being destroyed. A statement issued by the IDF has declared that 70% of all houses in Jabalia have now been destroyed. They brag about it. These are civilian structures, these are homes, houses, and they're proud of their decimation that they are causing. But it has not gone at all Israel's way, in northern Gaza particularly. The growing numbers of Hamas fighters, particularly within their militant Qassam brigades, demonstrating exactly why they aren't beaten yet, and this very much includes Jabalia. For example, fighters there, armed only with knives, have managed to take down armed IDF soldiers and seized their weapons. This is a story we're hearing more and more of. They then stormed a house being used by the IDF as a base for ground forces and took them out too, and again took their weaponry. Another report has come out overnight detailing a gathering of IDF soldiers around an armoured personnel carrier in Jabalia, and again IDF weaponry was used against them as Qassam brigade operatives with Israeli handmade hand grenades targeted this group, killing and wounding several. I see no reason to doubt these reports, but it goes to show how complacent IDF forces seemingly have become, and actually how people only recently recruited into Hamas are able to successfully combat them at that. In fact, Hamas have become so emboldened again, it seems, they even sent a message out to the families of the hostages they still, of course, hold. The war crime Hamas is guilty of course, but it was a pretty pointed message too. To them regarding the ceasefire talks widely expected to stall again, that are still ongoing right now, with a picture of Netanyahu's son Yair on a beach and with a quote saying, "Yair is in Miami, away from danger. What forces Netanyahu to make a comprehensive deal?" In other words, why should Netanyahu care about your family, the hostages we still hold, when his family is safe and away in the US? Hamas have agreed to ceasefire concessions, including Israeli soldiers remaining in Gaza to see a way through to a permanent ceasefire. It's Netanyahu again stalling matters. It's Netanyahu that's the reason these hostages have not been released. So this ought to cut through to Israelis already sickened and appalled at Netanyahu's uncaring stance towards rescuing their family. These are people who regularly protest him these days, after all. Let's go to Yemen next. The Houthis, of course, since my video on them the other day, fired off another Palestine 2 hypersonic ballistic missile, and this time there was no doubt it found its mark, hitting a park in Tel Aviv in the middle of the night. Air defences completely failed in Israel. An ongoing story as that's been for much of this year, as Israel increasingly finds itself more and more vulnerable to missile attack and these strikes getting through, be it missiles or drones or whatever. And this was all made all the more remarkable given US and UK forces were pounding the Yemeni capital of Sana'a at the same time. This also warrants some discussion because the US, their aim, well, it's widely poked fun at, isn't it? An international joke being that if they fire enough bullets, one of them's bound to hit the target. Well, they managed to hit one of their own jets. An FA-18 that took part in the attack on Yemen overnight was mistaken for an enemy aircraft by the US aircraft carrier, the Harry S. Truman, and they shot it down. The Houthis have no intention of stopping their attacks on Israel. Israel over the last 15 months has become an ever bigger target, and a target within their reach. Having gone from just fighting shipping in the Red Sea with dinghies and drones this time last year, the Houthis have therefore advanced massively, having become a bigger and bigger problem for Israel and its allies, and they show no sign of stopping regardless of the attacks on them, which historically have never made a difference to them, and I think they're unlikely to now. In Syria, Israel is facing harsh language for invading Syrian territory by Turkey's Erdogan as he sets about invading Syria himself, the hypocrite. The IDF have also toppled a Christian cross on Mount Hermon that has been standing there for decades. So much for Christians around the world who are defending Zionism, because Zionists couldn't care less for you or your religion any more than the Muslim majorities they are engaged in battle with. Here, though, things are slightly different, and the Israel-allied HTS, despite Israel largely not giving a stuff about HTS in return, are facing an economic crisis already that could see this more Israel-centric government topple a lot faster than first surmised. Roughly 25% of the Syrian economy relies on oil, an economy already on its knees following years of sanctions due to Syria's civil war. Yet the US, who are implementing many of those sanctions, occupy Syria's oil fields. Therefore, Syria's refineries rely on imports of crude oil from Iran, and Iran have turned the taps off. Here's a Cradle quote explaining all. The Banias oil refinery, the largest in Syria, has halted operations due to the cessation of crude oil shipments from Iran, following the fall of former President Bashar al-Assad, according to a 19th of December Financial Times report. The refinery processes 90,000 to 100,000 barrels of crude daily. We are only doing maintenance that takes a short amount of time so that we are ready for when crude oil is made available, Musallam told FT, noting that the refinery cannot remain idle for long without risking damage to equipment. Under Assad's government, Syria relied on Iran for 90% of its crude oil imports, with the rest sourced domestically, while the country's largest oil fields in the east remained under the occupation of the US military. What was that they were saying about Iran's axis of resistance falling apart? Seems Syria's economy might first. And where will that leave Israel other than Iran being able once again to potentially be able to establish ties to Hezbollah in Lebanon by still being able to get through Syria? But even if that isn't the case, Iran's leader Ayatollah Khomeini is laying the blame for that squarely on the US, whilst also making a mockery of attempts to displace what the West keep referring to as Iranian proxies. He issued a little statement saying, America's plan to control countries is in one of two ways, either creating tyranny or creating chaos. Yemenis fight because they are believers. Hezbollah fights because its faith drives it to the field. Hamas and Jihad fight because their faith obliges them to do so. These do not work on our behalf. Whoever says that Iran has lost its proxy forces is wrong, because we do not have proxy forces in the first place. And if we ever want to do something, we do not need proxy forces. The Iranian people will crush anyone who accepts to become a mercenary for the United States. I expect that the events in Syria will lead to the emergence of a group of honourable and strong people, and the future of the region will be better than its current reality. Iran does not have deputy forces, and the future of the region will be better than its current reality. Now, you can choose to agree or disagree with his positioning on that, but it doesn't really change the facts of what things are looking like on the ground, does it? And then there is Iraq, of course, also having it in for the new pro-Israel Syrian regime led by ISIS and Al-Qaeda leftovers, as the UN, acting on behalf of the US, apparently this is how it's being presented, have tried to go down the religious route to bend things to their will as Iraq promised to preemptively strike HTS forces who come too close to Iraq's border. According to Lebanese outlet Al Akbar, UN Special Representative for Iraq, Mohammed Al-Hassan, visited Iraqi cleric Ayatollah Ali Sistani to request him to issue a fatwa, an Islamic legal ruling to dismantle the Popular Mobilization Units, or PMU, amassed on Iraq's border with Syria to protect the country. The PMU having recognition in the Iraqi military whilst also being allied to Iranian Axis groups, shall we put it. A fatwa would get around the both legal and less legal alliances, shall we say, with the PMU. But not only does Sistani pointedly refuse, but he refused to even see the guy. Now, the PMU have said they're going to disarm, but they're not going to do so until the US leaves Iraq completely, having targeted both Israeli and US military targets within Iraq in solidarity with the people of Gaza themselves, alongside the more overt Axis group Islamic Resistance. All in all, things do seem to be cracking up at the seams for Israel on a multitude of different fronts. But that shouldn't be a surprise, with most other Arab nations in the region pretty much all aligning themselves against Israel for their genocide and their apartheid actions, and their greater Israel delusions. Here's hoping that very much continues. Now, I only touched in this video about the potential invasion of Syria by Turkey, but this is a huge story in itself, and actually one that doesn't benefit Israel either, given the likelihood of Turkey pushing beyond the Kurdish territory they have issue with, beyond that further into Syria, possibly into areas Israel are now controlling. But considering their actions could also end up triggering the return of ISIS as a force as well, it's not good news for anyone in point of fact. Get all the details of that story with all the dynamics of the various groups involved in that conflict in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't already done so. It all helps support the channel with more content dropping daily. That said, I am going on my Christmas break as of today, but I will be back on the 27th with normal service resuming. May I wish you all a very Merry Christmas. Thank you very much for watching the channel and supporting it this year, and I will hopefully catch you all on the next vid. Cheers, folks.